I wasn't supposed to be there that evening. The party had that spontaneous vibe, one of those last-minute gatherings you go to expecting nothing more than some laughs, music, and cheap beer, but certainly not any earth-shattering moments. It was my friend Justin who called me that afternoon, pushing me to come out for a bit. "You need this, Benjamin," he said. "You've been working nonstop, man." It was hard to argue with that. Lately, life felt like being on a treadmill with the incline cranked up. Days blurred together, work, bills, and an overwhelming sense of something slipping away that I couldn't quite put my finger on. So, I went. I needed to remind myself that there was still a world beyond spreadsheets and the lonely dinners I'd been having in front of the TV. What I didn't realize was that the world I thought I knew was about to come crashing down before the night ended. When I got there, the house was alive with energy. A two-story place, packed with people, the warm glow of a bonfire flickering in the backyard. I parked down the street, walked up, and tried to let the vibe pull me in. Beer in hand, I spotted Justin near the kitchen, entertaining a group of strangers with one of his classic over-the-top tales. He greeted me with a hearty slap on the back. "Benjamin, look who finally showed up." I smiled weakly and took a long swig from my drink. I told myself I'd stay for an hour or two, just long enough to unwind. I wandered through the house, making polite chit-chat, and even allowed the music to bring out a few genuine smiles. Then, I saw her. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Amid the crowd by the patio doors, there she was, my wife, Charlotte. Her dark hair was unmistakable, cascading over her shoulders in waves I used to love running my fingers through. But something wasn't right. Her hand wasn't holding a wine glass or resting on her hip. No, it was on a man's arm. The room seemed to spin, and I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. A less observant person might have passed it off as a trick of the light, some kind of misunderstanding, but I knew better. I'd been married to Charlotte for almost a decade. I knew her every little gesture, the way her laughter changed when she felt truly seen. I knew that look she was giving him. My heart hammered in my chest as I edged closer. I ducked into a shadowed corner of the room, unable to tear my eyes away. She wasn't just talking to him, she was leaning into him. Her body language screamed intimacy in a way no words could. The guy was tall, probably a few years younger than me, and he had that effortless confidence that only comes from never having to try too hard. He said something that made Charlotte laugh. A laugh that felt like it came from a different time, one I hadn't heard in years. For a moment, everything around me, the party, the people, the noise, faded into nothing. It was just the three of us, me, my wife, and this stranger who had somehow slipped into my life and taken something I thought was mine. But I couldn't just stand there forever. People moved around me, their faces blurring in the haze. Their voices became muffled, drowned out by the hammering in my head. I needed to get out. I stepped onto the patio, feeling the cool night air slap against my face, hoping it would clear my mind. My hand shook as I gripped the railing, staring at the bonfire as if it could offer me some kind of answer. It didn't take long for Justin to find me. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I could barely get the words out. "I think I just did." I didn't meet his eyes, and before he could ask what I meant, the patio doors slid open. There she was, Charlotte, followed by him. They didn't see me. They didn't see my eyes widen, or the way my fists clenched at my sides. All they saw was each other. Charlotte's laugh echoed behind me as I stood frozen, my back pressed against the cold wooden railing. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. Their body language said it all, telling a story that completely rewrote everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Her hand brushed his arm again, this time lingering for just a moment longer. I had to look away, my stomach churning. When I dared to look back, she was already leading him toward the driveway. My heart raced as I watched them cross the yard. Charlotte glanced over her shoulder, almost like she was checking for someone, but her eyes never met mine. She had no idea I was watching. They reached a sleek black car, clearly his. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in with such ease that it felt like a knife was twisting in my chest. He rounded the car and got into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, and I acted on pure instinct. I pushed through the crowd on the patio, ducked around the side gate, and made my way toward my car, careful not to draw attention. My car was parked a few houses down, nothing special, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't stand out. I slipped behind the wheel, keeping the engine off as I watched their taillights pull onto the main road. When they turned the corner, I followed. My palms were slick on the steering wheel as I kept a safe distance, never getting too close. Every part of me screamed that this was crazy, but I couldn't stop. I had to know where they were headed, what they were doing. I had to know how far this had gone. The road twisted through town and into the quieter suburbs, each turn digging deeper into my gut. Charlotte had always been fiercely protective of her routines. If she was driving this far out of her way, it wasn't for something innocent. Finally, they pulled into a driveway. The house was modest, tucked away behind a line of trees that hid much of the front yard. I parked a little farther down the street, killing the headlights and the engine. From where I sat, I had a clear view. I watched them as she followed him up the path to the front door, laughing softly at something he said. He unlocked the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound ringing in my ears even from this distance. For what felt like forever, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My head was pounding as I tried to make sense of what I was witnessing. A part of me wanted to rush in, demand answers, but I had no idea what I'd find or how I'd react. Instead, I reached for my phone. The screen stared back at me as I fumbled to open the camera. I zoomed in on the house, the porch light casting a faint glow over the door where they'd just disappeared. The video started recording. I felt strangely detached as I documented the scene. The house, the parked car, the undeniable proof that something was horribly wrong. The minutes stretched on. I was about to turn off the recording when something caught my eye, a movement in one of the upstairs windows. The blinds weren't fully drawn, and a thin strip of light slipped through. A shadow passed across the window, followed by another. I shifted in my seat, angling my phone to get a better view. Through the crack in the blinds, there she was, Charlotte's silhouette unmistakable. She was standing close to him, her hands resting on his shoulders. He tilted his head toward hers, their shadows blending together. My stomach tightened as I recorded every moment, unable to tear my gaze away. They moved as one, her hands sliding down his chest, his arms pulling her in. The images burned themselves into my mind, each one more painful than the last. Finally, the blinds snapped shut, cutting off my view. I sat there in silence, the stillness of the street broken only by the distant hum of traffic. My phone was still in my hand, the red recording icon blinking. I stopped the video and just stared at the screen. This was it. Evidence. I had proof now. Proof that the woman I thought I knew was someone else entirely. The cold night air seemed to press in on me as I sat there, unsure of what to do next. All I could do was wait and plan. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, parked just down the street from that house. The dashboard clock ticked by, minutes slipping into an hour, then two. My breath fogged up the car's interior with every exhale, each one a reminder of the storm that was building inside me. The blinds upstairs didn't move again. No lights flicked on downstairs. No shadows shifted against the dim light from the living room. The house was still, like it was mocking me, stretching every second into an eternity. I couldn't just leave, not now. Finally, the front door opened. I slouched lower in my seat, keeping the camera app open on my phone. They stepped out together, Charlotte's laughter floating through the night air again. Light, carefree, like she had no idea what was at stake. He followed her out, their shoulders brushing as they made their way toward his car. His hand lingered on her back for a moment, just long enough to churn my stomach. She got into the passenger seat, and he rounded the car to the driver's side. When the car pulled out of the driveway, I hit record again. I captured their every move as they drove off, careful to stay a few cars behind this time, making sure I didn't draw attention. The drive home was quieter than before, the roads emptier. They didn't speak, their heads turned forward. Maybe the small talk had run its course, or maybe there was nothing left to say. They stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. I parked a block away and waited, watching as he got out to fuel up. Charlotte stayed in the car, her face lit briefly by her phone's glow. Was she texting someone? Him? Me? The knot of anger in my chest tightened, but I kept the camera steady. When the pump clicked off and he replaced the nozzle, I saw Charlotte lean over, their heads coming together, a closeness that couldn't be mistaken for anything innocent. My grip on the phone tightened so much I was sure it would crack. I didn't miss a single second of it. When they finally got back on the road, I followed them again, this time knowing exactly where they were headed. Sure enough, they pulled into our neighborhood and stopped in front of our house. Charlotte stepped out of the car, waving casually, as if he were just dropping her off after a normal night out. He waited until she was inside before pulling away. I parked a few houses down, trying to calm my racing pulse. I didn't want to go inside yet, not while I felt like my skin was on fire, every nerve exposed. The evidence was there, in my phone, in my mind, in my gut. I just needed to figure out what to do with it. When I finally stepped through the door, the house was silent. Charlotte's shoes were by the door, her purse slung over the back of a chair in the kitchen. She must have gone straight to bed. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I walked to the living room and sank onto the couch, pulling out my phone. The videos were all there, staring back at me, damning in their clarity. The car ride, the house, the gas station kiss, everything. My fingers hovered over the screen, torn between hitting send and forwarding it to someone. I couldn't bring myself to send it to anyone, not yet. Instead, I created a new folder on my phone and labeled it simply Charlotte. I uploaded the videos and locked the folder with a password, one only I knew. Evidence, I kept telling myself. That's all it was. I had to stay focused. No hasty decisions. No outbursts. Not yet. I wasn't finished gathering the pieces. Before heading to bed, I pulled out a notebook from my desk drawer and began writing down everything I'd seen that night. Every little detail I could recall. Times, places, actions. It was clinical, detached, just the facts, like I was logging something for work. I needed that distance, even if it was the only thing keeping me from losing control. When I finally climbed into bed, Charlotte stirred. Her hair fanned out across the pillow, and her breathing was soft, even. For a brief moment, I let myself pretend this was just another ordinary night. That everything was fine. That the woman lying next to me hadn't just spent the evening with another man. But the truth hung there now, between us, like a razor-sharp blade. And I was the one who had to decide when to twist it. The next morning, the sun filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting a warm, golden glow. It should have been comforting, but nothing about that day felt right. Charlotte was already up, the sound of running water from the shower drifting through the cracked bathroom door. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, replaying the events of the previous night in my mind. The images, the sounds, none of it was fading. It had embedded itself in my brain like shards of glass, each memory cutting a little deeper. It was time to do something. By the time Charlotte stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I was in the kitchen. Coffee brewed in the pot, its rich aroma mixing with the faint scent of toast. She smiled as she walked in, that same calm mask in place. "You're up early," she said, reaching for a mug from the cupboard. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Figured I'd get a jump on the day." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "I've got a few errands to run later. Anything you need while I'm out?" "Just the usual groceries," I said, watching her carefully over the rim of my mug. Her demeanor was so easy, almost too easy. Did she know I followed her last night? Had she seen my car? If she had, she wasn't showing it. We went through the motions of breakfast, our usual routine that had played out for years. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Every word, every glance felt loaded. But I didn't let it show. Not yet. When she went upstairs to get dressed, I saw my chance. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, half-zipped. Inside, her everyday tote was neatly folded. I reached into the junk drawer, pulled out the small tracking device I'd bought online weeks ago for a project that never materialized, and slipped it into one of the purse's inside pockets. The bug was tiny, barely the size of a paperclip. It would record audio and send a live feed directly to my phone. I had originally planned to use it at work to monitor meetings when I wasn't around. I never imagined I'd end up using it to spy on my wife. When Charlotte came back downstairs, I was pouring another cup of coffee, keeping my expression carefully neutral. "Heading out now?" I asked casually, glancing at her bag as she grabbed it. "Yeah," she said, slinging it over her shoulder. "Just a quick trip. I'll see you later." I waited until her car disappeared down the street before pulling out my phone. The app connected to the bug with a soft ping, and the audio feed came online a second later. I turned up the volume, holding my breath. At first, all I could hear was the hum of the car engine and the soft rustle of her bag shifting on the passenger seat. Then, her voice. "Hey, it's me. I'm on my way." A pause. Then a male voice, familiar and unwelcome. "Good. We've got some time before the next meeting." My grip tightened on the phone as I listened, unable to tear myself away. They didn't say anything outright incriminating. Not yet. It was just casual talk, plans for later, hints at meeting up again. But the ease in their voices, the familiar tone, told me everything I needed to know. The app tracked her location, a pulsing dot moving toward the other side of town. My stomach churned as I realized where she was heading. The same house from last night. The same man. I grabbed my keys and jacket, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, I wouldn't just watch. I needed more than shadows and suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. The drive was shorter than I remembered, or maybe I was just too consumed with adrenaline to notice. I parked a block away, careful not to be seen, and crept toward the house on foot. Through the app, I could hear their voices clearly now. She was inside, her voice light and teasing. His laugh was low, smooth, grating against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. The blinds upstairs were still drawn, but the living room curtains left a gap wide enough for me to see inside. They were standing close, her hand on his chest, his fingers brushing her arm. The same intimacy I'd witnessed before, now playing out with every movement. My hands trembled as I recorded, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the truth. About what came next. When they disappeared upstairs, I stayed where I was, the app still feeding their muffled voices into my headphones. I didn't know how long I'd been crouched there when a new thought struck me, cold and sharp. What if she wasn't just lying to me? What if she was planning something worse? I slipped back to my car, heart pounding, and stared at the recordings on my phone. Evidence was piling up, but I needed more than proof of her infidelity. I needed to know exactly what I was up against, and I needed to decide when to confront her. The drive back home felt surreal, as if the world outside the car had transformed into some dreamlike painting smeared with gray. The air felt heavy, like the sky before a storm. My mind raced, replaying the snippets of their conversation and the images I'd captured through the window of that stranger's house. Every part of me wanted to confront her now, throw open the door and demand answers, watch her facade crack under the weight of her lies. But I knew better. The evidence wasn't just for me anymore. It was my shield, my weapon, the thing that would keep me standing when everything else fell apart. And there was more to gather. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always had, a perfectly normal suburban home. But now, every brick, every window, every blade of grass seemed to mock me. This house was built on a foundation of lies. When I stepped inside, the stillness hit me. No laughter. No warmth. Just silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Her purse was back on the counter, the bug still transmitting faint static through my phone. She wasn't home yet, probably meeting him again before coming back to play her role as my wife. I set my phone on the table, the app still running, and stared at the feed. The audio was faint now, filled with mundane noises, the rustle of paper, footsteps on a floor. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, trying to piece together what I'd learned. There were layers to this, more than just the affair. The bug had picked up something odd during their earlier conversation, a mention of meetings, of timing. It didn't sound like the usual whispers of infidelity. It sounded calculated, like a plan. My phone buzzed suddenly, jerking me upright. I grabbed it, my breath catching as I read the notification. Recording interrupted. Bug disconnected. Disconnected? How? I tried to reconnect the feed, but it wouldn't work. The app showed the device as inactive, as if it had been tampered with or removed. My stomach twisted. Had she found it? Had he? I stared at the screen, the knot in my chest tightening with every failed attempt to reconnect. If they had found the bug, they would know I was watching. They'd know I was onto them. The sound of a car in the driveway broke my thoughts. I quickly set the phone down and grabbed a glass from the counter, filling it with water to make it look like I hadn't been sitting there waiting. The front door opened, and she walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Hey, she said, her tone casual. You're home early. I forced a smile, raising the glass to my lips. Figured I'd call it a day. You? Oh, just errands, she replied, brushing past me to set her purse on the counter. She didn't look at me as she spoke, her voice light and practiced. Picked up some groceries, returned a couple of things. The usual. I watched her closely, searching for any hint that she knew. Her face remained calm, her movement smooth and deliberate, but there was something in her eyes, a subtle wariness I couldn't quite place. Find everything you needed? I asked, keeping my voice light. HM? Oh, yeah, she said, reaching into the fridge. She pulled out a bottle of wine, poured herself a glass, and took a long sip before finally turning to face me. Why? Just curious, I replied, setting my glass down. You seem busy lately. She laughed a little too quickly. Well, someone has to keep the house running while you're working late. Can't all be spreadsheets and emails, right? I nodded, careful not to reveal too much. The weight of what I knew pressed down on me, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. Later that night, when she was in the shower, I checked her purse. The bug was gone. My stomach sank as I rummaged through the pockets, my fingers brushing against the fabric where it had been. They knew, or at least they suspected. The storm was building, closer and darker than ever, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold it back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her shadow in that man's house, her laughter echoing like a cruel reminder of how blind I'd been. My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. The bug was gone. Did she know? Was she testing me, waiting for me to slip? Or was she so confident in her deception that she didn't care? By morning, I had a plan. I couldn't afford another mistake. If the bug was gone, I needed another way to get the truth. Something even more concrete. Something they couldn't see coming. Charlotte was already up when I walked into the kitchen, her back to me as she poured coffee. She wore her usual morning robe, her hair damp from the shower, moving with the casual ease of someone who had nothing to hide. "Morning," she said over her shoulder. "Want some coffee?" "Sure," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. She handed me a mug, her smile brief but practiced. I sipped the coffee, watching her from the corner of my eye as she checked her phone. "What's on the agenda today?" I asked. She shrugged, not looking up. "Same as always. Groceries, errands, maybe a stop at the gym." "You?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Work," I said simply. "Nothing exciting," she muttered, still scrolling through her phone. The silence between us felt heavier than usual. I wanted to confront her right then and there, lay it all out on the table, but I knew the timing wasn't right. Not yet. Once she left the house, I got to work. I called a private investigator, someone I found online with great reviews for discrete cases. The conversation was brief, direct. I explained the situation, leaving out the emotional details, and scheduled a meeting for later that day. The investigator's office was in a strip mall on the edge of town. The name on the door read Carter Investigations, and inside, a middle-aged man with a graying beard and sharp eyes greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mr. Birch, right?" he said, motioning for me to sit. "Benjamin," I replied, sitting across from him. "Thanks for seeing me on short notice." "No problem," he said, leaning back in his chair. "So, what are we dealing with?" I laid it out for him, the affair, the house, the missing bug. Carter listened without interrupting, his expression calm and professional. When I finished, he nodded. "Sounds like you've already done some of the groundwork," he said. "The video you got is solid, but if you want to build a stronger case, especially if this ends up in court, you'll need more." "Like what?" I asked. "Patterns," he said. "Times, places, habits. If she's meeting him regularly, we'll track it. If there's money involved, gifts, hotels, anything, we'll find it. The more we can connect, the harder it'll be for her to deny." "And the bug?" I asked. "If they found it, they're probably being more careful now," Carter said. "But people get sloppy. They always do." I nodded, clenching my fist in my lap. "How long will it take?" I asked. "That depends," he said. "Could be a few weeks, maybe less. I'll have my team start surveillance today. If she's seeing this guy regularly, we'll know." I handed over a deposit and gave him Charlotte's usual routines, the places she liked to go. Carter assured me he'd be discreet, that she wouldn't even know she was being watched. I left his office with a mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. That evening, Charlotte came home later than usual. She breezed through the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided meeting my gaze. "Long day?" I asked as she set her bag on the counter. "Yeah," she said, rifling through the fridge. "Traffic was terrible. Did you make it to the gym?" I asked casually. Her hand froze for a moment before she grabbed a bottle of water. "No, I ran out of time." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "Too bad. I know you've been trying to stick with it." She gave me a weak smile and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I waited until I heard the shower running before I went to her bag. Nothing. No receipts. No unusual items. She was being careful. Too careful. But I had Carter now, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks in her facade grew wide enough to reveal everything she was hiding. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope. Every interaction with Charlotte was a balancing act, pretending everything was fine while suspicion simmered just beneath the surface. She carried on as if nothing had changed. Her routines were flawless, her demeanor calm. But now, every word she spoke, every move she made felt like a puzzle piece I had to decipher. I checked in with Carter daily, keeping our calls brief and to the point. "We've got her patterns locked down," he said on the third day. She met him again yesterday afternoon. Same house? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Yeah, Carter replied. They were inside talking for a while, then they left together. Drove to a boutique in the city. She bought something. A gift. My stomach twisted. Yeah, it looked like one. We're pulling receipts. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. What else? They had lunch at a quiet cafe, then went back to his place. We'll have footage for you tonight. Good, I muttered through gritted teeth. Keep me updated. I hung up and stared at my phone, my throat tightening. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them painted the picture I wanted to see. She wasn't just having an affair, she was living a second life. A life where I was little more than an afterthought. That night, I sat in my car outside the house, scrolling through the footage Carter had sent. The timestamps matched the hours she had claimed to be running errands. In the video, she looked happy, carefree, like a person I hadn't seen in years. She laughed as she leaned across the table at the cafe, her hand brushing his as she passed him the small wrapped box. My chest tightened watching her smile, the kind of smile she hadn't given me in what felt like forever. How long had she been practicing this lie? How long had I been blind to it? The next day, Carter called again. We've got something new, he said, his tone more urgent than before. What is it? I asked, pacing the living room. Your wife and her boyfriend. He's got her moving money. The air seemed to leave the room. What? She transferred a substantial amount yesterday afternoon, Carter said. We tracked it to a shared account under his name. Could be for something specific, or just a nest egg. Either way, she's preparing for something. The words hit me like a gut punch. Moving money. Was this her way of securing an escape? Or was it something worse? What'd I do with this? My voice was tight. Document it, Carter said. Every transfer, every purchase. If this goes to court, you'll need it. And you'll want to cut her off before she takes more. I nodded, swallowing hard. Anything else? Yeah, he said. She's meeting him again tonight. Same house. When Charlotte left that evening, I followed. Carter's team had already planted a tracker on her car, but I needed to see it for myself. The drive had become familiar, the route etched into my memory. I stayed a safe distance back, using the GPS feed from Carter to guide me. She pulled into the same driveway, the headlights illuminating the small house before disappearing behind the garage door. I parked a block away, camera ready. A few minutes later, the light in the living room flicked on. Through the curtains, I saw them together. His hand was on her back as she leaned against the kitchen counter. They were laughing again. Her head tilted toward his, as if they shared some private joke. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep filming. This wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about understanding exactly what I was up against. I watched as they moved through the house, her hand trailing along his arm. He pulled a folder from the counter, and together they bent over it, studying something I couldn't quite make out. Papers, maybe documents. Their movements became more animated, her hands gesturing as she spoke, his head nodding in agreement. What were they planning? The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. I remained in the shadows, my phone recording every second. When she finally left the house, I followed her back home, careful to stay out of sight. She walked through the door with that same breezy demeanor she'd had all week, setting her bag on the counter like it was just another day. Hey, she said, flashing me a quick smile. How was your night? Quiet. I replied, forcing myself to sound casual. Yours? Nothing exciting, she said, grabbing a glass of water. Just errands. I nodded, watching her closely. You look tired. Long day, she answered, turning toward the stairs. I'm heading to bed. As her footsteps faded, I pulled out my phone and opened the video feed. Every lie she told was now a thread I could pull on. And soon, I would tug hard enough to watch everything she'd built come crashing down. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Charlotte had gone to bed, staring at the footage I'd collected. Every frame burned into my memory. Her smile, her laugh, her hand brushing his as they leaned over the papers in his kitchen. They weren't just sneaking around, they were plotting something. The details were still hazy, but Carter's findings had begun to paint a clearer picture. The money transfers, the hidden account, the secret meetings, it wasn't just an affair. It was a plan. For what? I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. It was bigger than infidelity. The next morning, Charlotte was already gone by the time I woke up. She'd left a note on the counter. Morning errands. Back by noon. Love you. The irony of those last two words hit me like a punch to the gut. I called Carter as soon as I finished my coffee. She's out again, I said, pacing the living room. Probably with him. Already on it, Carter replied. We've got someone following her. She went back to his house first thing this morning. They left together about 20 minutes ago. Where to? I asked, my jaw tightening. City center, he said. Looks like they're heading into a law office. I froze. A law office? Yeah, Carter said. Could be divorce prep, could be something else. Hard to say without more details. Divorce. The word hit me like a slap. It made sense. Money transfers, secrecy, secret meetings. They were laying the groundwork to cut me out of everything. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. Keep me updated. You got it, Carter said. And Benjamin, don't do anything rash. I spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on anything else. Work emails piled up in my inbox, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Every few minutes, I checked my phone, waiting for updates. Around noon, Carter called again. They just left the law office, he said. They stopped for coffee, then split up. Your wife's heading back toward home. And him? I asked. He's still downtown, Carter replied. We're keeping an eye on him. I hung up, my mind racing. Whatever they discussed at that law office, I had to know. If they were building a case against me, financial, legal, or otherwise, I had to be prepared. Charlotte walked through the door a little after 12, her smile bright but forced. Hey, she said, setting her bag on the counter. How's your morning? Fine, I said, my voice flat. Yours? Productive, she replied, opening the fridge. Just ran some errands. Nothing exciting. I nodded, my gaze lingering on her as she poured herself a glass of water. Anything I need to know about? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Her movements faltered for the briefest moment, an imperceptible hesitation that most people wouldn't have noticed. Nope, she said, flashing me another smile. Just groceries and a few returns. I didn't push her, not yet, but I made a mental note of her demeanor, the subtle shift in her voice when she responded. She was hiding something, and I was getting closer to uncovering what it was. Later that evening, after she'd gone to bed, I went through her bag again. It had become a habit now, one I hated but couldn't stop. My hands moved quickly, searching for anything out of place. This time I found it. At the bottom of her bag, tucked between her wallet and a spare set of keys, was a receipt. The header read Law Offices of Sterling and Ames. My breath caught as I scanned the details. It was for a consultation fee, paid in cash. The date? Today. I set the receipt back carefully, my mind racing. Consultation for what? Divorce? Financial separation? Something worse? I took a photo of the receipt and slipped it back into her bag, making sure not to disturb anything else. Then I opened my phone and texted Carter. Found something. Receipt for a law office consultation. Sterling and Ames. Need to know what they specialize in. His response came quickly. On it. We'll update you soon. I barely slept that night. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified, heavier. I replayed the events of the day in my head. The receipt, glaring like a red flag I couldn't ignore. What was she planning? The next morning, Carter called. Got some intel on Sterling and Ames, he said. They're a boutique firm. Handle family law, estate planning, and asset division. I clenched my jaw, forcing the bile rising in my throat to settle. Asset division? Yeah, Carter said. It's standard for divorce cases, but they also handle trusts and property disputes. If she's working with them, she's probably laying groundwork. Groundwork. The word echoed in my mind. Heavy, damning. She was preparing to take everything. Our home, our finances, maybe even the kids. What do you want to do? Carter asked. I stared at the kitchen table, my fists tightening. Keep following her. I need to know exactly how far this goes. By the time Charlotte came home that evening, I had already made up my mind. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I had everything I needed to dismantle whatever she was building. And when the time came, I'd make sure she never saw it coming. Revenge wasn't something I ever thought I'd consider, let alone plan. But after weeks of watching, waiting, and collecting evidence, it was the only path forward. Charlotte wasn't just betraying me. She was trying to destroy me. And I wasn't about to let her. The morning after Carter's latest update, I sat in my office, staring at the documents spread across my desk. Bank transfers, legal consultations, receipts, proof of the web she'd spun behind my back. Her plan was coming into focus now. She wanted to leave me broken, both personally and financially. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one. Step 1 was reclaiming control of our finances. I logged into our joint accounts, my heart pounding as I navigated through the transactions. Just as Carter had said, the money she'd been moving wasn't subtle. Small transfers at first, but now larger sums, all funneled into an account I didn't recognize. I didn't hesitate. I locked the account, freezing all transfers and setting up alerts for any future activity. Then, I opened a separate account in my name only and transferred a substantial portion of the remaining funds. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to ensure she couldn't drain me dry. Next, I called our financial advisor, a man I'd trusted for years, though Charlotte had insisted on working with him more closely lately. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning, keeping my reasons vague. Just want to review a few things, I said, masking the steel in my voice. That evening, I played my role as the oblivious husband. Charlotte came home late again, her excuses rehearsed but unconvincing. She kissed me on the cheek and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Once she was asleep, I made my second move. I went to her purse, retrieved the receipt from Sterling and Ames. This time, I didn't put it back. Instead, I replaced the original receipt with a photocopy, making sure she wouldn't notice the switch. The original went into a folder with the rest of my evidence, now thicker than ever. From there, I moved to her laptop. She always left it unlocked, a habit I'd never questioned until now. My hands trembled slightly as I opened her email, scanning for anything that might fill in the gaps. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a thread between her and him, buried under the label work to avoid suspicion. Their exchanges were a mix of flirtation and planning, each message more damning than the last. But one email, dated just a few days ago, made my blood run cold. Subject: finalizing the agreement. From him. To Charlotte. Charlotte, the lawyer says the paperwork is almost ready. Once you serve him, we'll be able to move forward. The house will be ours, and the account is set up for the transfer. Let me know if he suspects anything. Love, D. Serve me. They were preparing to blindside me with divorce papers, to take the house, the money, everything. My hands tightened on the laptop, but I forced myself to breathe. This was the proof I needed. I forwarded the email to my private account, ensuring I had it saved. Then I deleted the forwarding trace, leaving no sign of my tampering. The next morning, I met with our financial advisor. He greeted me warmly, but his smile faltered when I laid out my concerns. Dan, I said, leaning forward, I've noticed some irregularities in our accounts. Transfers I didn't authorize. Dan frowned, pulling up the records on his screen. That's unusual. Charlotte's been handling most of the finances lately, I said. Has she mentioned anything? No. I replied, my voice flat. That's the problem. Dan hesitated, his eyes scanning the screen. These transfers are recent. Significant, too. Do you want me to flag them? Already done, I said. What I need now is to protect what's left. Set up an account in my name only. I don't want Charlotte to have access. Dan nodded, his demeanor turning professional. Understood. We'll get it done today. As I left his office, a new sense of control settled over me. Charlotte thought she held all the cards, but she was about to learn otherwise. That afternoon, I made my third move. I drove to the law office listed on the receipt, parking a few blocks away to avoid being seen. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, feigning nervousness. But I need some information about a consultation fee. My wife. She's been meeting here, and I think there's been a mistake. The receptionist frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's her name? Charlotte Birch, I said, my voice carefully measured. She's been handling some things for us, but I think she might have misunderstood something about our accounts. Her fingers danced over the keyboard. One moment. I held my breath as she scanned the records. Finally, she looked up. Yes, we have her listed for a consultation about asset division. It's fairly common for her words trailed off as she saw my expression. Half disbelief, half betrayal. I see, I said, my tone hollow. Thank you. I turned and left, my heart pounding. Asset division. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the growing pile of evidence. Bank records, emails, video footage. It wasn't just enough to confront her. It was enough to destroy her plan entirely. When Charlotte walked through the door, I didn't greet her. I just watched, my face unreadable, as she went through the motions of unpacking groceries and chatting about her day. She didn't know yet, but I'd already made my first move, and soon I'd make my second. The storm broke that night. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, building my case piece by piece. Now, the time had come to pull it all together and watch the life Charlotte thought she controlled crumble at her feet. She came home late again, her smile practiced as she breezed through the door. I didn't bother with small talk this time. I waited in the living room, the manila folder on the coffee table between us. "Benjamin," she said, her tone cautious. "What's this?" "Sit," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. My voice was calm, too calm. Her smile faltered, but she obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of the chair. Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. "What's going on?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped together. "I know, Charlotte. About him. About the money. About the lawyer." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "Don't. I have the receipts, the emails, the footage. Everything." Her breath hitched, her composure slipping. "Benjamin, I can explain." I interrupted, my voice cutting like glass. "Go ahead. Explain how you've been siphoning money from our accounts. Explain why you've been meeting with a divorce lawyer to blindside me. Explain why you thought you could build a life with him while leaving me in ruins." Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "Exactly," I said, leaning back. "You can't." The next morning, I made my final moves. First, I contacted Carter. "I want all the evidence compiled into a single report," I said. "Send it to the lawyer I'm about to hire." "You got it," he said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Make sure the financial details are watertight." I'm cutting her off today. By noon, I'd met with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Nicole, who reviewed the evidence with a keen eye. "This is solid," she said. "We can file first, and we'll ask for full asset protection." "She's been moving money?" "Good. That strengthens our case." I nodded. "I don't just want to win. I want her to walk away with nothing." Nicole's lips curved into a cold smile. "Consider it done." Charlotte was still reeling when I came home that evening. She tried to talk to me, her voice shaky as she pleaded for another chance, but it was too late for apologies. I handed her the divorce papers. "You wanted to serve me?" I said, my tone sharp. "Guess what? I beat you to it." Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "Benjamin, you can't." "I can," I said, cutting her off. And I did. "The house is in my name. The accounts are locked. And your boyfriend's little dream of taking what's mine is over." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy, not after what she'd done. "You're leaving me with nothing," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's right," I said, my gaze unflinching. "Because that's exactly what you deserve." In the days that followed, I watched her world collapse. Her lawyer, blindsided by my move, scrambled to salvage what little they could, but there was nothing to save. Every dollar she tried to hide, every scheme she'd planned, was laid bare in court. The judge ruled swiftly. The house stayed with me, as did the majority of our assets. Her claims of financial abuse fell flat against the mountain of evidence proving her deceit. Her lover, realizing he'd lost his golden ticket, disappeared without a trace. When it was over, she was left with nothing. No house, no money, no future. And me? I walked away with my dignity intact and my life back in my hands. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to the channel.